Look at the weather.
It's beautiful here.
Non-stop rain.
Oh, man, it is a blazer out there.
It's cold and it's shivery.
It is cold.
Really coming down here.
I really enjoy your weather reports.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, we're talking weather in a whole new way. From historical events to what's coming up, plus weather news, science, safety, fun facts, and more.
I like where this is going.
This is Weather Weekly. Weather Weekly with Wish TV Storm Track 8 meteorologist Marcus Bailey.
It is episode 80. Man, just moving right along here. Weather Weekly, good to be with you here last full week of the month of July. My kids are going back to school today, the day that this is released here, the 27th. This is crazy. Where'd the summer go? My goodness. Indiana State Fair will kick off on Friday, and we are just moving along. I think Colts training camp started this week. Fall right around the corner. Good to be with you. I'm meteorologist Marcus Bailey with Wish TV, Storm Track 8 in Indianapolis. And hey, we finally are getting some needed rain around the area. Some good news for area farmers and gardeners and lawn enthusiasts alike. I do want to spend the chunk of our podcast here talking rain-related things. I've had a lot of questions, not just recently, but this has been kind of an ongoing thing I've noted for much of my career, especially as social media became more of a thing and people could reach out a little more easily, on the differences of flood warnings. There's so many different types here. And the one that always kind of catches people off guard is the one that is classified as a real or aerial flood advisory, flood warning, flood watch. There's different varieties of it. An aerial, and then you have obviously what we've traditionally always called a flash flood warning. We have flash flood watches also. And so there's different varieties, and then we just have your traditional flood warnings that are more designed for rivers. So I wanted to talk about that, especially in light of some of you may have noticed if you're listening here early on in the week on Tuesday. Now I'm recording this on Tuesday. The historic flooding that took place in St. Louis, which was actually attached to the same storm complex that impacted parts of southwestern parts of our state during the day on Tuesday. And I kind of want to tie it all in together, talk about some of those rainfall numbers that they picked up and just kind of talk about that historic perspective of the rainfall that they picked up in St. Louis, and then kind of piggyback that into the different types of flood products that the National Weather Service puts out and what the difference is and what it means for you. So hopefully that will answer some of your questions. We'll talk about that coming up next here on Weather Weekly.
Audible's romance collection has something to satisfy every side of you. When it comes to what kind of romance you're into, you don't have to choose just one. Fancy a dalliance with a duke, or maybe a steamy billionaire. You could find a book boyfriend in the city and another one tearing it up on the hockey field. And if nothing on this earth satisfies, you can always find love in another realm. Discover modern rom-coms from authors like Lily Chu and Ali Hazelwood, the latest romantasy series from Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, plus Regency favorites like Bridgerton and Outlander. And of course, all the really steamy stuff. Your first great love story is free when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
It is episode number 80 of Weather Weekly. Good to be with you here. Drop date is July 27th, 2022. Talking all things flooding here. I know that's kind of weird to talk about, considering that we are in the midst of a drought in much of central Indiana, really for the entire state for that matter. But we've had our issues with flooding. Going back to this past Sunday, we had areas in southwestern Indiana around Vincennes, Knox County, and parts of Davies County, over 6 inches of rainfall. And then, as we're recording this on the 26th here, more rain to come. And there was numerous flood advisories and flood watches out for those areas that picked up a lot of rain on Sunday. So yes, even though you are in a drought, you can easily flood, given the circumstances with the amount of rain. And I think it's also important to note, and that's what I really wanted to kind of start things off with, is the St. Louis flooding, which has been quite historic, that came down for Tuesday, July 26th. So just kind of taking you back here, it was what we call a training setup. And what we mean by that is that you had kind of a line of storms around a boundary, and they basically just lined out, and their movement made it so that heavy rain kind of just consistently went over the same spots, right? There was movement to the actual storms, but they just kind of rode along a line over these same areas. Was included with that. Now, as last check, and these aren't going to be the official final numbers, but the numbers as of 8 o'clock in the morning Tuesday in St. Louis was just over 8 inches of rainfall. Now, to put that in perspective here, from what I'm just kind of perusing on Twitter here, this was a max daily event here in St. Louis. It broke the old daily rainfall amount set back in 1950, and I think what's impressive about that is that the 1915 situation for the daily record rainfall in St. Louis actually came from a tropical system. It was the Galveston hurricane, I believe, that made its way up into the Midwest, and then it dumped nearly 7 inches of rainfall in one day in St. Louis. They broke this record. Within about a 5-hour span, they were already above 7 inches of rainfall since midnight. And that happened at around by 5:30. So it was about a 5 to 6 hour window where they had already broken that record. I find that just incredible. What also is interesting, and just looking from some of the info that Twitter's putting out, because you get some of this data kind of on the fly. And as I mentioned, as I'm recording this, it's still ongoing. They should wrap up the rain probably in the next couple of hours. So I don't know if 10 inches of rainfall is within reach officially at the airport in St. Louis. Some areas have exceeded 10 inches in the metro area. But 2 of the top 10 maximum hourly precip events in St. Louis occurred since midnight on the 26th. Two of them. So that's incredible that was able to happen. They picked up 2.21 inches of rain in the 4 o'clock hour, and nearly 2 inches of rain in the 3 o'clock hour. It was 2.21 inches in the 4 o'clock hour, 1.97 inches in the 3 o'clock hour. It's fascinating. It's an immense amount of rain. And so they ended up having to do water rescues. I believe from some of the video I've seen that they actually had some flooded interstates. I believe I-44 and even I-70 in parts of St. Louis, or at least around the St. Louis area, were flooded, and they were having to perform water rescues. I mean, no shocker, right? Just that immense amount of rain. This was the official tweet that came from the National Weather Service out of St. Louis. All-time daily rainfall record at St. Louis shattered through 7 a.m. 8.06 inches of rainfall has been observed, which breaks the all-time daily record rainfall from August 20th, 1915 of 6.85 inches. That was the remnants of Galveston 1915 hurricane. I think I had also seen that that rainfall would have that amount of rainfall would have made it into the top 10 wettest days for Houston. And Houston is very much known to be a heavy rain city. They've got some pretty incredible daily rainfall records, and a lot of those are associated with tropical storms. So pretty incredible stuff that's coming out of St. Louis here. There was a flash flood emergency. It was technically a flash flood warning, but then they kind of tagged it with emergency, mostly because of where it was located. It was within the city of St. Louis. And so there was neighborhoods that were getting flooded. The problem is you were getting water in places that typically don't see water just because of the immense amount of rain. And so areas that were prone to flooding were obviously going to flood, but then it was so bad that water had to run off somewhere else. And so then you were starting to get water in places that typically don't see water. So that's why they ended up going with this flash flood warning, which is an emergency flash flood warning. But it did want to bring to the attention here, because I get comments sometimes when we get these situations. Obviously, we haven't had many this year, but we'll get different types of advisories and watches and warnings when it comes to flooding. You kind of have your generic flood warnings, you have your aerial flood warnings, and then you have your flash flood warnings. So I kind of wanted to talk briefly about what the differences are here. So flooding or flash flood watches. All right. So much like severe thunderstorm or tornado watches, flash flood watches are issued to inform the public. It's just a heads up, right? Now, depending on what you're talking about in terms of flash flooding or flooding is going to depend on kind of the rainfall rates. There can be a little bit that kind of goes into it. It can go into past rainfall events. How saturated is the ground? Are the rivers already swollen? That type of thing. So it's not just kind of a clear, cut and dry, we're just going to issue, because there's heavy rain on tap, we're going to issue a flood watch or a flash flood watch. Okay. I think the key thing here, and where a lot of people kind of get confused, is the difference between a flash flood and an aerial flood. All right. So just kind of giving you a quick definition here and the difference here. Flash flood warnings are issued for flooding usually occurring within 6 hours of heavy rain. An aerial flood warning is issued for flooding that occurs more gradually, normally from prolonged and persistent moderate to heavy rainfall. Okay, so an example of that would be what's kind of happening today, which is Tuesday the 26th, and what's happening in southwestern Indiana. And part of that is having to take into account what happened over the weekend. This past weekend on Sunday night, we had areas near Vincennes, so southwest Indiana, south of Terre Haute, and some areas picked up between 4 to 6 inches plus of rainfall. So already saturated. There had to be some water rescues performed in parts of Knox County there. Okay. Now, Monday, we had some time to kind of dry out. And so this was an area that was classified as abnormally dry, and parts of the area was actually in a drought stage. But again, when you have that amount of rain in a very short amount of time, it's going to run off quickly. Creek streams become overrun a little bit and swollen. So you're overly saturated in some of those spots, because you can only, even when you're very dry, you can only take on so much water in a given amount of time. And so now you've got another round coming in. And so we had aerial flood watches in place for those same areas. And we also had aerial flood advisories in place. Just because the thinking was you're not going to get probably the amount that you had on Sunday, where you're talking 4, 5, 6 plus inches of rainfall, but you could be tacking on 1 to 2, maybe as high as 3 inches of rainfall. And so that is going to be a gradual flooding concern, because it's not going to come in 1 hour like what you had in St. Louis, right? You're going to get that gradually over several hours. And so that can that could gradually increase your flood risk, as opposed to a flash flood warning, which is what happened in St. Louis, where they picked up 2+ inches of rainfall in an hour. And it happened back-to-back hours. And so that happened in a hurry, right? And that's why cars were stranded. It literally was overtaking areas that weren't really prepared or prone to flooding, because areas that were prone to flooding couldn't take any more water. And so that water's got to go somewhere. It's got to go somewhere, and it overflows into areas that typically don't flood. All right. So again, just to kind of reiterate there, a flash flood warning is issued for flooding that normally occurs within 6 hours of heavy or intense rainfall. This results in small creeks and streams quickly rising. Flooding in areas near these creeks and streams, as well as low-lying flood-prone areas, develops very quickly and is a significant threat to life and or property. An aerial flood warning is normally issued for flooding that develops more gradually, usually from prolonged or persistent moderate to heavy rainfall. This results in a gradual ponding or buildup of water in low-lying flood-prone areas, as well as small creeks and streams. The flooding normally occurs more than 6 hours after the rainfall begins and may cover a large area. However, even though this type of flooding develops more slowly than flash flooding, it can still be a threat to life and property. Now, the last thing here is flood advisory. So a flood advisory is issued when flooding is not considered a significant threat to life or property is expecting or occurring. This usually deals with nuisance flooding problems, such as flooding in low-lying areas or poor drainage, as well as minor flooding on streets and roadways. This type of flooding causes some inconvenience, but is not generally considered a significant threat to life or property. Flood advisories are normally issued as an urban or small stream flood advisory. The other to note is that sometimes you'll get flood warnings if you are kind of a weather nerd and you go on the Weather Service website. You check in with your weather radios, listen to the forecast that way. Flood warnings will be for rivers, and those can last days, sometimes weeks, when you get runoff from some of these creeks and streams, and then they feed into some of these rivers. Case in point, we had that, a couple of weeks ago because of some heavy rain we had up around Muncie and Anderson. And so we ended up getting flood warnings for the White River downstream in Hamilton County and Marion County, Indianapolis, because of that heavy rain. Even though we didn't get the heavy rain in Indianapolis, because Indianapolis is downstream, all of that water was runoff, feeds into the White River, and then it may gradually become swollen, and so you'll put those flood warnings there. And so that people that live along those areas just have to be aware that you could have some higher water. People that may boat recreationally on the White River need to be aware of that as well. And that kind of goes for big rivers as well: Mississippi, Ohio, Missouri, those kind of things. And so that's the other type of flood warning. There, you typically don't get flood watches for rivers, but you will get flood warnings for those. So those are the kind of different types of flood warning. Hopefully that gives you some clarification there between the difference between the flash flood warning and the aerial flood warnings, and a little bit of the difference between the warning and the advisory as well. A little bit too much water in some spots over the past few days in Indiana, but boy, some much needed rain in other spots as well. Will we see more? Because we definitely need to see more across the entire state. We'll look ahead to that forecast that's coming up next here on Weather Weekly. Here's a look at the forecast for the last week of the month of July, and gearing up for August as we talk to you on the next podcast next week. Man, we're just flying around, right? The temperatures are not bad here for the remainder of the week. We're going to stay in the low 80s, and we're going to continue with at least some needed rain chances here for most. I know there's some areas we were talking about southwestern Indiana near Knox and Davies counties, Vincennes area, Washington, where you're overly saturated. But the bulk of the state, look, we could use a little bit of rain. We'll continue with shower chances for your Thursday. And then it really sets up to be a wonderful weekend. State Fair opens up on Friday. 3 full weeks of State Fair action starting this weekend here. Low 80s for Friday. We've got a lot of race activity out at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway with IndyCar and NASCAR both in town on the road course. Should be beautiful if you're going to be heading out to the track for that Saturday and Sunday, and highs in the low 80s. No real significant heat that I see here early on into the week next week. Now, there are some hints that we may start to see the heat build up a little bit here by late week. There were some hints by, say, Wednesday. We could be touching the upper 80s and maybe closer to 90 for Thursday and Friday. So we'll have our opportunities for sure to see that heat. And the long-term pattern here from the Climate Prediction Center, the 8 to 14 day outlook of really strong signal here for above average temperatures and a pretty strong signal for below average precipitation. So we're kind of getting our needed rain chances here. It may be our last real good multiple day rain chances for a little while. And then the August outlook is now out. And for the entire month, pretty good strong signal for above average temperatures and a pretty strong signal for below average precipitation. So not the news we want to hear. Now as we start gearing up into the late summer months and gearing up toward fall, really could use some of those rain chances. And hopefully, and again, not all hope is lost. Even if you say, hey, it's below average, as long as we can time out maybe some real good rain chances here and there, you may end up okay. And so, that's what we're hoping for here. So, you can put a little bit of info in there and take away something when it comes to that below average precipitation, but it doesn't necessarily paint the whole story. We know that if you can get a real good, downpour at your house, that can go a long way to kind of last you for a week or so. To get you out of trouble, at least short term. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, but that's what at least some of the projections are kind of putting out and some of the signals that we're seeing. So we'll keep an eye on that. Thanks for joining us here for episode number 80 of Weather Weekly. We always appreciate your time. If you have any comments, concerns, complaints, or suggestions, we'd love to hear them. You can email me anytime, marcus.bailey@wishtv.com. You can reach me out on social media as well. On Facebook, it's Marcus Bailey Weather, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's @Marcus Bailey. While you're here, make sure to check out all the other great podcasts, part of the All Indiana Podcast Network. Have a great week and a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week. God bless.
Discover more from Storm Track 8 Weather and Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Plus, be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.